My connection to Hagoyin Sadiq, Rav Chaim Drukman Zatzal, began 29 years ago when I made Aliyah. I became a Ram in his Yeshiva, a Ram of Shir Hay, Yeshivat Or Etzion, and that was my introduction to a large extent to the world of Merkaz Harav. He was a Merkaz Haravnik, probably top of the line, a Talmud Muvag of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kuk Zatzal, who was the son of Rav Avraham Yitzhak Cohen Kuk Zatzal, the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, and a Malach Hashem Tzvakos in his own right, and so was his son. And Rav Chaim Drukman was Mishamesh, this Rebbe, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kuk Zatzal. He came from Europe. He was born in Europe. I don't know exactly his biographical background, to be quite honest. He told me he came here at Eretz Yisrael at the age of 11. And he came apparently almost as a kind of Yossam because his parents were still in Chutz La'aretz, and he somehow was able to come to Eretz Yisrael. And in the course of his stint here in Eretz Yisrael, he probably was the founder of what's known as Gush Emunim. Probably the entire Hityashvut of Eretz Yisrael is largely due to his efforts that he spearheaded. He is a remarkable person in many, many respects, and I'm just going to share with you a number of small notes that I wrote down for myself. I'll just begin with a comment that I heard myself from Hagoyin Rosh Auerbach Zatzal. When I came to Eretz Yisrael and I wanted to be a Ram somewhere in one of the yeshivas, one of the Hesped yeshivas actually, I applied to about 11 Hesped yeshivas. I said sure, I'm at 11 Hesped yeshivas. I was accepted in 4 of them. I decided those 4 are not to my liking. And out of nowhere, I came to Rav Chaim Drukman. I didn't even say a shir in the yeshiva, and offered me a job. I became a Ram in his yeshiva. But there were those who, in my family, who did not see this move in a very positive kind of way. And there was a second issue that also was involved in my life. I sent several of my children to my Rabbi. My Rabbi is a yeshiva under the auspices of Rabbi Baruch Chait Shlita. Last night we were zocher to hear his youngest son, beautiful music from Rabbi Eliyahu Chait. He was actually, Rabbi Chait himself was a member, maybe the founder perhaps, of that well-known musical ensemble from many, many decades ago, the Rabbi's Sons. Anyway, he established Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and essentially he established it with the Haskama of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. It was a yeshiva very parallel, very similar to what exists in Chutz La'aretz and yeshiva high schools, namely Limudei Kodesh, Limudei Chol, a combination, a hybrid of both. And so I went with a close mishpacha of mine to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in order to ask him about these 2 moves. Number one, my Rava move, and the other move is the Yeshiva Or Etzion, the Hesped Yeshiva. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the conversation was conducted in Yiddish completely, and it went along the following lines. I'm being mekatzer. Chaval, it wasn't videoed, and Chaval, it wasn't taped, recorded. What can I do? Regarding the Marava, so the contention was that Marava, this yeshiva, is under the cherem of Rav Shach Zatzal, Rosh Yeshiva Ponovich. He actually put a cherem against Marava because there were secular studies. He didn't want Israelis who were in the yeshiva kind of modality and that kind of mode to go to that kind of format. And therefore, that was the objection. He himself, Rav Shach, what I understood it because I spoke to him directly about it. He himself was not opposed to individuals going there, but he felt institutionally, for the public record, he had to oppose the institution. And there was a cherem against his yeshiva. So this question was asked, how could I send my children to such a makom, to such a place, where you have a cherem of the Ziknei Rosh Yeshiva, one of the Gdolei Ador and Shum Safek? And the answer, Rav Shlomo Zalman said, first I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate it. Was hat der cherem Rav Shach zu tun mit dein Bruder? What does the cherem Rav Shach have to do with your brother? You can gather who else was there. Favos er schuldig. Why is he guilty? For the cherem Rav Shach. Das is the best Platz for him. That's the best place for him to send his children. Okay? That was already 50% of the battle. The other 50% was ended very quickly when The question that was posed to Rav Shlomo Zalman was, aber der Hashkofis von Yeshivat Or Etzion, nicht unsere Hashkofis, it's not our Hashkofa, it doesn't represent our Weltschang, our world outlook. So Rav Shlomo Zalman said to the person who asked the question, ihr habt ein Monopol auf Hashkofis? You have a monopoly on Hashkofis? It's doch andere Hashkofis in the world. There are a lot of Hashkofis in the world. So then the question was, does he subscribe to that Hashkofa? The answer was, L'may nafkamina. He's like Asach Hashkofis. Obviously, he did not necessarily subscribe to that Hashkofa. And then he said about Rabbi Chaim Drukman, the following, which I'll never forget the rest of my life. When he was asked about Rabbi Chaim Drukman, so he asked the other person, "You can't Chaimke? Do you know Chaimke?" He called him in a very beloved, loving kind of way. And the answer was no. So he said, "Ich ken him, but I know him. Kimat 50 Jahr, almost 50 years of my life. Er doch ben bayis bei mir. He came out, lives in my house. They grew up in the same area. Rabbi Chaim Drukman grew up in the Rechavia area of Yerushalayim. And then he said the following, describing Rabbi Chaim Drukman: Er is a chefza of Mesiras Nefesh for Klal Yisrael." Remember that line the rest of your life. A chefza for the briskas of Mesiras Nefesh for Klal Yisrael. Anyway, that was the end of the discussion, and I became a Ram in Yeshivat Or Etzion, which I discovered very quickly was a bastion of Merkaz Harav. A lot of very well-known Ramim today who occupy some famous positions here in Eretz Yisrael, chief rabbis of cities, chief rabbis of institutions, Rosh Yeshiva, were all essentially at that time Ramim in this institution. I just want to share with you, as I said, one or two vignettes. I believe I heard from Rav Drukman. He quoted the Bnei Yissaschar. I have not checked inside in a long time to see that sefer. I actually look at that sefer every Yom Tov and even every Chanukah. And he mentioned for the Bnei Yissaschar the three levels that the Gemara has in Shabbos. Kayadua, Neri, Shubeso, Mahadrim, Mahadrim, and Mahadrim. And very often Rav Drukman spoke about the importance of Chazorah, of learning Torah and chazering it again and again and again. He himself was a Baki B'Shas. He didn't say Shurim in Halacha, he didn't say Gemara Shurim, he said primarily Shurim in Machshava, many Shurim, multiple Shurim, Umtin Shurim, Kol HaYom V'Kol HaLayla. But he himself was someone who clearly was out Karad with all of Shas, and he used to quote the Bnei Yissaschar, who said, there's the basic level, Neri Shubeso, you learn the Gemara. And then the Mahadrin. Mahadrin means Elu Shechozrim. And Mahadrin and Mahadrin, Elu Shechozrim Acharei Chazorah. After the Chazorah, they Chazer again and again. You open inside the Gemara Chagiga, famous Gemara, where the Gemara speaks about someone who learns not just Mea Pamim Vachas. What's the value of learning 101 times? You already know it the 100th time. And the answer is, it's an indication of your commitment, of the Avas HaTorah Sheba'eres B'kirbecha, of the love of Torah that you have. And Rav Drukman was completely an individual. The Avas HaTorah was literally Yokedes B'kirbo. We saw it, we were margish it, we felt it. To watch him davening was literally to watch a Malach Hashem Tzvokos. He davened like an Eish Lahova. Maybe akin to what we heard this morning. Me'ein de me'ein. Literally, he was on fire. I spent a number of Shabbosim in Or Etzion. Rav Drukman used to sing on Friday night before Kiddush. Rebone! Anybody ever say here, Rebone or Elamim? Is anyone in this room that ever heard of? Oh, versteht sich. Rebone or Elamim. That was a 20-minute job. 20 minutes. Each word was uttered with incredible fervor and kavanah and unbelievable passion. Anytime he said a bracha, every bracha was said with hislavu shen kamo. Literally every single bracha. The davening was a bit longer than here in the yeshiva. That's the understatement of the year. They davened with incredible kavanah, and he was the one who led this entire enterprise. He told me that, I asked him where his English came from. He had some English. He was a Chaver Knesset. I don't know how many years, 12 years, perhaps a Chaver Knesset. At the end, he withdrew from the entire Knesset. He decided on his own to leave. I asked him why. Why you left the Knesset? Isn't that considered to be a rather bakovedika kind of shtella? I'm being polite. Isn't that a bakovedika kind of shtella? Certainly bakovedik in terms of the maskaret that they offer. He told me he couldn't handle the environment. He couldn't handle the atmosphere. He was an ish emes. Honesty. Yashrus. The pasuk says, Elokim asas adam yashar ve'ema bikshu chishbenes rabim. Hashem created a person yashar, glat, straight. That's what he was. That's why he couldn't handle the Knesset. He was an ish emes. And unfortunately, we no longer have such anshe emes. I remember I had a machlokes with him on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Ha'atzmaut, there they said Hallel with the bracha, which is not my cup of tea. And then, at the end of the davening, he then made a bracha, Behislavu subekol rum godol shechiyonu. That shechiyonu took 5 minutes. I, in my silliness, I tried not to do it publicly, but at the end, of course, I did it publicly. I indicated to him, I thought there's a suffix bracha batol over here. What's the nature of this shechiyanu? And then he proceeded on the spot to say a shir on the spot, and then he cited his makar. His makar was Rav Goren Zatzal, the chief rabbi, who was Rav Goren was an Ilui Otzum. Rav Goren, actually, I met when he was the chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He used to come to the shiurim of Rav Soloveitchik in Maria in Manhattan. And he called him, Rav Soloveitchik, Goronchik, the Hebron Ilui. He was the Ilui from Hebron. So he was a very close confidant of Hagoin Rav Goren. You could disagree with a lot of his positions, and many did, but he was certainly a Goin, unquestionably. And he followed generally those positions that he saw from his Rabbi. I remember many times, twice a week, the Garzan used to come and say a shir in the yeshiva. Hagoin Azam Nechemia Goldberg, the son of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Once he said a shir to the whole yeshiva, shir klali, on the Masechta we were learning, and then he said a shir to the kollel. I attended both shiurim in the 2 years I was there. I remember he used to come in to the yeshiva and get up to the front of the bima. The whole yeshiva was there. At that time there were 500 talmidim in the yeshiva when I was there. And then he would say, what sugya are you learning? They would tell him about Masechta. They would tell him about sugya. And then he would press the button, and all of a sudden the shir emerged right on the spot. And that sugya, and that inyan, and the same with the kollel. What area of Shulchan Aruch are you studying? Eben Ezer, Chashem Mishpat, or Chaim, you're there. It didn't make a difference. What siman are you in? What halacha are you holding by? And on the spot a shir came. Rav Drukman, the moment Rav Zalman Nechemia arrived in the scene, was running around like a chicken without a head. He was mishamishim. I never saw anything like it. Unbelievable. There was nothing he couldn't do for Hagarzen, who was one of the Gdolei Ador, unquestionably. And there were several other Gdolei Ador that also appeared on the scene, that again, he was mechabid them, I would say, unbelievable. I remember, before I became a Ram in the yeshiva, I came to visit the yeshiva. He invited me for Shabbos one Friday night. It was Shabbos Parshas Vayechi. And he said a shir on the Rashi, the famous Rashi. Yaakov Avinu, as you know, and Yosef as well. Were frightened stiff about Chas v'Sholom remaining in Mitzrayim, not being buried in Eretz Yisrael. So there's a famous Rashi, has several pshatim on the pasuk. Al no tikbareini b'Mitzrayim. Rashi has 3 pshatim. So Rav Drukman gets up. He's in front of 1,000 people in this base medrash, jam-packed, Shabbos Parshas Vayechi, and says the following: Al no tikbareini b'Toronto. He said, Toronto? I was living in Toronto, Canada at that time. Whom is he talking about? Can't imagine he's talking about me. So I figured, oh, Toronto. The Rishonim speak of Toronto, Italy. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem in Toronto. So that's what he's talking about. He said it about 9 times. I counted it. Then I realized, if the shoe fits, wear it. He was talking to me. Al no tikbereini b'Toronto. And the last time, the 9th time, he said, Canada. So then it was pretty clear who he was talking about. I was quite embarrassed, to say the least. I come over to him after the Sikha, and I said, Rosh Yeshiva, kaven elai? And in English he says, if the shoe fits, wear it. I'll never forget that. And then I became a Ram in Yeshivat Eretz Yom, Shir Hey. It was the highest level Shir I ever said in Eretz Yisrael. Since then I've gone, B'igra Rama, the Bir HaMikta. Baruch Hashem. I remember hearing from him as well, since we heard the Hallel today, the 3 Madregos that I mentioned in the Hallel a number of times. We heard a very beautiful pshat last night from Harav and the Yudin Shlita regarding this. The Hallel we speak about Beis Yisrael, Beis Aaron, Yimei Hashem, the Rishonim, the Radak, and many others. Tumult on what exactly? There are 3 Madregos being mentioned over here. 3 different groups of people. The godless Rabbi Drukman, he related to every single group, irrespective of where you were. He literally loved all of Klal Yisrael. I remember vividly, he had a fair number of his own children, and when I came to his home, I saw other children there as well. What kind of children? Autistic children, children with all kinds of physiological issues, mental issues. He and his Rebbitzin, Shetiboda l'chaim arukim, she's a medical doctor. They adopted, I don't know how many more children, each one of them with more difficulties than the other. Out of their abounding love for Knesset Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael. He was metapel, and he and his Rebbitzin were metapel with literally, I say on them, the following pasuk. Harofe l'shvurei leiv u'mechabish le'atzveisa. Literally, binding up the wounds, the emotional wounds, the physical wounds of all of Klal Yisrael. You had access to him, literally, kimat, kol hayom v'kol halayla. I don't know if the man ever went to sleep. I remember I went to get Haskama. I wrote a small little sefer on Chumash called Shaila Avi, Abreshas and Shemos. I wanted to get his Haskama. It took me a very long time. He was never there in the yeshiva, or he was busy. He was saying shiurim. So once I called his son-in-law, Hagan Rav Shimon Lapid Shlita, and I asked him, Matai Harav Yeshama? He says, Rav David Tagia B'Chadesrei Baruch Shu Yeh. Almost every night he went to a chasana. Almost every night he was literally at some simcha. Literally. Every single night of the year. With the exception of Shabbos, probably, and Yom Tov, I imagine, Chalamoid. I arrive in the scene at 11:15, and his son-in-law tells me, Rav David Ani, Pashut Mitnatzel, Mitztaer, U'achshav Yatza, Mishu Yitkasher Elav, Chatuna, אז הוא יצא לחתונה. אבל תחכה כמה דקות, אני מניח שהוא פשוט הוא יחזור עוד מעט. He'll return in a few minutes. So I waited half hour, he didn't return. So then Rav Shimon Lapid says, יש שוויון, נעשה עכשיו שיעור, ורב דיוויד יעביר שיעור. This is way after I left the yeshiva, many years after. I was already here in the Torah Shvaga. And so I asked him, what are they learning? He said, who's going to come at 11:15 at night? He said, don't worry, I'll gather the kollel together. And he gathered 25 guys from the kollel in Eretz Yom. And all of a sudden, I found myself saying a shir on Baba Kama on a sugya that I was not familiar with, in Perak HaGozel. And after that, an hour later, it was about 12:30 already. He still had not returned. Then he said, well, maybe we'll have now Shelot Teshuvot. And that went on for another hour. Rabbi Drukman came back at 1:45. And at 1:45, he sees me there. His son-in-law tells him what happened. He apologizes profusely to me. And then he proceeds to write me Haskama. And I left at around 3:15, 3:20 a.m. in the morning after he wrote his Haskama. He was a person who, as I said, was an Eved La'Adoina. The Radak writes at the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, Vayom Hashem Moshe Eved Hashem. That's what he was, an Eved Hashem. He saw himself 24/7 as someone who was Meshubad Lebari Eilam, connected to Hashem Yisbarach completely, totally. And as I said, what I saw in him was someone who literally 24/7 was trying to carry out the Ratzon Hashem as best he could. Many years ago, I saw him Mabit. Mabit has a comment You gave me a lot of time, Naftali, to think about the Hallel. So the Mabit has a comment on the middle of the Hallel. There's a language that Pitachto the Moseiroi. The two actually called say minog and Oshana Rabbah. Many have this minog that what they do is they undo the. Since we're learning Masechah Sukkah this year, so they undo actually the ksharim that many have a minog to place on the lulav. They undo them, and they undo them because Oshana Rabbah, the seventh day of Sukkot, is connected to David HaMelech. You know there are 2 Arabas, 3 Adasim, 1 Esrog. You have Tzadikim, according to the Chazal, according to the Medrash, Yosef, Moshe and Aaron, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the seventh day of Hoshana Rabbah is David HaMelech. Ki neged kol atzmeisai tamarnu Hashem yikamoicha.